Good morning. My name is John Driscoll. I'm here with another episode of the Electric Bison. You can tell from my voice that I'm still recovering from that open heart surgery. I'm doing pretty well. I've had a chance to do quite a bit of reading and watching national and international news. And actually, I feel pretty good about how things are going, believe it or not. I guess the place to start about my thinking on it is I was just reading John Steinbeck's book, The Russian Journal, that he did with Frank Capra right after the Second World War. He went through Russia and he captured the two of them with photographs and journalism. They captured what they saw in Russia because that was the beginning of the Cold War, and we really didn't know much about Russia. It's really kind of a neat book, and I'm particularly enjoying the part where they're in the Ukraine, talking to the people running those communes. And, you couldn't help but like the Russian people. They'd been through a lot. A lot of them had fought as partisans against the Nazis. And particularly the women, they're strong women. They're happy people, laughing all the time. And I feel like what they captured is not something that will disappear easily. So I'm feeling good about the Russian people. And but one of the things that came out, two things that come to my mind right now is the first thing is they just didn't quite understand where Americans were coming from. Our checks and balances on power that's in our Constitution. It's actually essential to our way of looking at our government because we came from a historical place that it didn't like kings. We didn't trust people, individuals with power, and we wanted to have the Supreme Court checking the presidency and the Congress checking the presidency and so on and so forth. Each one having a little piece of power, enough to check and balance each other, which I happen to agree with that. I think that was very wise. But the Russians don't have that in their background, and they just have a natural affinity for whoever their leader is, to follow their leader. And I kind of see that. You see that in the military. I mean, I get that. So what I'm thinking is, even if we got a clown like President Trump for our leader right now, who's clearly a narcissist, somebody who can't think beyond his own peripheral vision. We'll get through this. I think we really will. And we just have to have faith in each other. The other thing that came out of that book already for me was at the start of it, Steinbeck made a comment. He said, after going through Russia and writing about it, he had come to the conclusion that nothing good comes from group thinking. A group can't come up with anything really original. It's really individuals that come up with ideas that are important, and then I guess the group picks up on them. But he felt very strongly about that. And I think that's interesting. So I'm going to keep my eye open for individual ideas that are here in our country or around the world that we can build on, that are not the product of just groupthink. So those are two pretty interesting developments since I last talked to you. Well, one of the things that's happened here recently is, we threw in with Netanyahu and the right-wing Israelis, and we decided that we were going to bomb the secure facilities for nuclear weapons, or the development of nuclear weapons in Iran. And so we did that. We showed our stuff. And two things about that I just want to draw to your attention. I'm a former intelligence officer. I took the job very seriously. And when an intelligence officer puts together an assessment of a situation, it's usually at the front end of a staff process. And there's really a lot of responsibility associated with being an intelligence analyst. And you look at three possible things that could happen, you know, things that are most likely, things that are most dangerous. And you advise the other people on the staff, and they develop courses of action to address all the possible courses of action that the enemy might take. And that's how it works. You come up with the real possibilities, then the people working on the operations plan put together what they think will solve all the different things that you're concerned about. Well, one of the things that is real obvious to me as an intelligence officer is Trump doesn't like to hear anybody besides his own thinking. That's stupid. The man is an absolute idiot. There's no other way to put it. He's got limited experience, and he should really value hardcore analytical assessments that came from the CIA, for example. And then he went and he trashed his own person, that Tulsi Gabbard, for saying that they didn't really think that the Iranians had the bomb made, and I trust their assessment of that. He opted to go with the promoter, Netanyahu, who was trying to finagle him. He's been trying to finagle for a year now to get us involved in Israel's pet war with Iran. So that's the first thing, is how Trump trashed our analysts. That's unacceptable. That's stupid. I mean, it's not just unacceptable, it's really dumb. And then the second thing is, after it was all over with, we had the bomb damage assessments come in from our own Defense Intelligence Agency. And that's what they do. You know, they do the best they can to figure out really what was the damage. Well, of course, President Trump wants us to think that we blew their stuff away and they're no longer a problem, end of story, move on. It's not true. It's a lie. And the bomb damage assessment, which you have to have that, you have to know as best you can what the damage was. It comes through loud and clear that they're probably a couple months setback, but there's a real chance that they could keep moving in their planning for a nuclear capability. I would only add that it seems to me that if they were in doubt about whether they should actually build a nuclear weapon, you know, and they were restrained in their thinking because they were their Shiite Muslim view of the world was that they didn't want to do that to other people. That's kind of what held them back. I would suspect that last restraint is gone now, and that they're gonna build a nuclear weapon. God, it just kills me how stupid people are. But anyhow, that's kind of how I see it. But the important point here is that we've got a president who, whatever his capabilities are, and you know, he's not a stupid, he's not a complete idiot, borderline, but not a complete idiot. He really doesn't want to hear anything besides what he thinks. It's very dangerous, and that's not something that we should want to do. And so as we're moving into this situation, we've still got 3.5 years of it. Good grief. We've got to find a way to have this person as our leader, but at the same time protect our country, protect ourselves. And I think we need to make sure that we have our own sources of information. Another example that are reliable, not the president. He's not reliable. He's a liar. There's nothing else to say about it. He's a liar. But we're seeing it again with the assessment coming out of the Republican leadership in the Senate, where they're saying that this big tax bill, tax relief bill that they have passed the House and they want to get through the Senate here shortly, will be won't be as expensive as everybody says it is. And of course, that's not true either. I mean, you can You can pick your sources. You can pick the one that says, "I want you to take my tax bill, and believe me, it's not going to the reduction's not going to cost as much." Or you can take the bipartisan Congressional Budget Office, which says it's going to cost this amount of money, our best assessment, and go with that. And why wouldn't you do that and face up to it instead of trying to lowball it, make it easier to stick it to your constituents? God, what a joke! But anyhow, and then the other thing is the other bipartisan office is the Congressional Research Service, which is not controlled by the White House. It's controlled by both parties of Congress, and it's come out with an assessment of the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So, and it said it went through 7 studies of that act, which has been in place a little over 5 years, and they can find no saving graces for it. What good did it do for the country? It doesn't stand on its own, in spite of what all the advocates for the tax break claim. And so now the people that have been pushing the tax cut that's going to be so expensive for our country are trying to badmouth the Congressional Research Service. I go with the Congressional Research Service every time. So again, when you're dealing with liars, you got to find your best source of information and go with it. And that's what I recommend that we do. Now, I last week talked about Mrs. Daly, Marcus Daly's wife. She was quite a woman here in Montana. She did a lot, and I noticed that the last issue of Montana Magazine of Western History came out with a story about F. Scott Fitzgerald being here in Montana over at the Castle Mountain Cattle Company, just over the hill here from Helena by White Sulphur Springs. He'd come out to be with a college classmate named Donahoe, and the two of them were good friends, and Fitzgerald came out and had his Western experience on the Castle Mountain Cattle Company ranch for a summer. And out of that came some of his writing, A Diamond as Big as the Ritz, and some other things, and how he was influenced by about Butte, Butte being a huge mining operation, and all that it entailed. He kind of influenced his thinking that went into the writing of this one short story called A Diamond as Big as the Ritz. Also, the thinking was that it went into his mental construct for The Great Gatsby, kind of a Marcus Daly kind of person. Well, anyhow, I find that all very interesting. But the article was great. It was by a couple people that have moved to Montana from over there in that Minneapolis, St. Paul area, where Fitzgerald was from. But I would like to add to that I think is really important information. Michael Donahoe, who was the father of Fitzgerald's classmate, he was a real critical guy with Marcus Daly. He was very important. He was a real bright guy that Daly brought in to kind of coordinate all the coal hauling railroads in the Butte area. You had the Northern Pacific and the Montana Central and the Great Northern, and moving all that coal around when the mines were still operating off of steam-powered hoists, and the smelters that were in the Butte area. And so there's a lot of coal involved coming from up at Sand Coulee and over at Red Lodge, down at Kimmerer, Wyoming. And he was really good at that. And he was kind of hidden in the bureaucracy of the Butte Anaconda and Pacific Railroad. But if you look through the papers for the Anaconda Company, about the time Daly died, Daly was writing these really, actually pleading letters to Donahoe. He was writing from New York City to get Donahoe to come up with more cash out of the different far-flung operations of the Anaconda Company, the logging operations, smelting, mining, wherever he could find cash, get it back to him in New York City, because he had to pay the return on investment of the investors in the new holding company called Amalgamated Copper Mining Company. Well, I'm bringing this up because that's a situation like the one we're dealing with our president. What happened there is Marcus Daly, he'd started the Anaconda Copper Company back in 1881 with a separate set of partners. And then by 1889, when he went back to New York City, well, actually went back to Europe to take some medical treatment or physical treatment at a spa there. And he never did come back to Montana. He was planning to come back to Montana as a banker. And he got real sick and he died on his way back to Montana when he was in New York City at the Netherlands Hotel in November of 1900. But when he was back in New York City, he sold the Anaconda Copper Mining Company to Rockefeller, Henry Rogers, and Barrage. Big three. They had a syndicate, and their plan was to control copper mining in the United States. And the one part of that control was going to be the Anaconda Company. So what they did is when Daly went back there, he sold out to Rockefeller, and he got taken pretty bad. He got hurt. I think he was not a happy guy when he died. That's my take on it, because he had a perfectly good company that was really strong out here in Montana. It was worth about $39 million, and that was solid value. And he could tell his friends, if you put money in this company, you're going to get an 8.5% return on investment. He felt really good about that. But when in New York City, he cashed out part of the sales price of the company so he could pay off his partners, because they were getting older and they needed to cash out. So he took his part of the sales price in stock, and then he was told to put his stock in a safe deposit box. And then while he did that, and remember the value of the company was about $39 million, Rockefeller, Barrage, and Henry Rogers, what they did is they went out and they floated $75 million worth of stock against the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. So you had a company worth $39 million suddenly being sold for $75 million. And and then the other thing they did is the three of them were in an executive committee, and they stuck poor old Marcus Daly in his last year of life with the responsibility of producing that high rate of return that he'd promised all of his friends, but not for $39 million of value, except for $75 million of value. And that transaction was later exposed in a book called Frenzied Finance by one of the people who was actually involved, one of the insiders, a whistleblower, called Frenzied Finance. And it's a classic case of stock watering. It was basically was fraud that the Rockefeller, Barrage, and Rogers were performing, and the person that paid the price on that was Marcus Daly. So he's writing these plaintive letters back to Michael Donahoe going into July of 1900, saying, find any cash you can. And of course, the Anaconda Company's subsidiaries were all going gangbusters. Any kind of a business that's expanding rapidly is always short on cash, so it was a bad time. And he was doing that, and that's where it was at. And then Donahoe, he quit working for Butte Anaconda Pacific on July 1st, 1900. and then he formally became a partner in a bank called Daly, Donahoe, and Greenwood. Uh, and so Daly and Donahoe were going to be banking partners. And if you look at the reverse directory for Butte for 1899, 1900, you'll find that Marcus Daly is listed as a banker for Daly, Donahoe, and Greenwood, right? He was planning to come back and be a banker. Well, Donahoe left the, the constellation of Anaconda Companies in July, and when the big speech about us all being buried in Standard Oil coffins was given on the steps of the courthouse in Butte, one of the things mentioned was that everybody knows that Donahoe is leaving the Anaconda Company, and the reading between the lines was that Daly's strength is failing, and Rockefeller, Barrage, and Rogers, the Standard Oil Syndicate, is ascendant. And of course, that's when the gunmen started showing up on the hill in Butte. Rogers' favorite thing was hiring gunmen to go and crack heads, and that's what was going on. So then what happens is Daly dies in November, and he was real close to Margaret Daly. Him and his wife were really tight. He used to brag that Margaret Daly was the only woman he ever met underground on business, and that was because her dad was a mine timber salesperson, and he would go underground down in Orford, Utah, where Daly was working a mine down there, and she would help him measure for the underground timber so he could bid on Daly's operation. Well, what happened was one day she was on an inclined plane. It wasn't a vertical shaft, but an inclined shaft. She got out in that inclined shaft and couldn't stop going down the shaft. It was like kind of a runaway situation. She went from one level down to the next, and who steps out from the lower level but none other than Marcus Daly to save the day. And he caught her, and he said that's how he met her underground on business. And they got married a short time after that. She was a very capable woman. She'd been trained as a school teacher, and she was no dummy. She was no dummy. But anyhow, when Daly died, the first thing that she did, knowing the situation her husband had been placed into by these creeps back in New York City that didn't know how to tell the truth either, is she sold all of his racehorses right in the middle of winter. Sent out the word from New York to Hamilton, where all the racehorses were. That wasn't the only place, but it was a big center of his racehorses. She had them all gathered up and put into these horse palace cars and sent back to New York City. And there was a huge auction of horse flesh in February, the closing days of February 1901. And she sold all of his great horses, and all these people came in from Kentucky and California and Saudi Arabia to bid on these horses at Madison Square Garden. She had them under Madison Square Garden. And it was going to be a 3-day horse sale, but she cut it off to 2 days. Sold all the horses, and then there was a couple of sales later to add to that. She just got rid of them, which was pretty cold when you think about it. Marcus loved his horses, but he was history, and so were they. And she got rid of them. So she had this money, and what she did with the money was very instructive. She took the cash she got from selling his horses, because they were short on cash, because everything, had been picked clean to pay these return on investment for this watered stock. So she goes and she takes the money that she got from selling the horses, and she bought out Michael Donahoe, Daly's good buddy. They were kind of a alter ego. Two of them got along great. So she buys out Michael Donahoe so that he no longer is partner in the Daly Donahoe Bank. And then she changes the bank to Daly Bank and Trust. And who's president? Margaret Daly, president, Daly Bank and Trust Company. And it's interesting, I found a copy of her bank book that she had over in the Bitterroot. She's a pretty cool lady. But anyhow, she has at the top of the bank book page, Margaret Daly, banker. Yep. And what she was doing is she was getting control of the Rockefeller people because they could not operate without the payroll. And the Daily Bank and Trust Company, there was two of them. There was one in Butte, which handled all the companies, smelter and mining, all that kind of stuff, all the business, because one of Daly's earlier partners had insisted on there being a separate bank just for the business. And then they had a Daily Bank and Trust over in Anaconda that handled the Daily family affairs, because Daly had a tendency to write checks when he wasn't sure there was money there. So she had both banks. She was the president of both banks. And her key guy in the bank in Butte was none other than John D. Ryan. And John D. Ryan, Daly and her both liked him. He'd come into the scene a couple years earlier as a peddler for a company called Carter Oil Company. He was definitely not a Standard Oil guy, right? Right. And then over in Anaconda, the president of their bank was John Toole. That's K. Ross Toole's, the historian, the famous historian, his father. They called him Oil Can Toole. Well, he ran the Anaconda Bank, and they handled all the money, the daily personal money, for this estate, mansion, all that kind of stuff. So what's interesting is they had Rockefeller and Rogers and Barrage by the short hair, right? They couldn't operate without knowing what their payroll was. I think it's great. So over time, Mrs. Daly is the one that had the accurate information, not the BS that Rockefeller was peddling to all of his important contemporaries in New York City. And I wanted to bring that up to your attention, because if we're going to have this country run on a tight, reliable schedule for the next couple of years, when we have a liar as our commander-in-chief and liars as his, his people in Congress, they've given up their credibility as far as I'm concerned, then we're going to have a good source of information about what's going on. I think the Congressional Budget Office is one. I think the Congressional Research Service is another, because they're bipartisan. But every chance we get to have our own reliable source of information to inform our public policy debate, we should use it, because these guys are going to lie till the cows come home. I guess there's nothing more to add to it except to say that we've got proof that that's what's going on, both with the big tax cut and with the bombing and obliteration, supposedly, of Iran's nuclear capability. Thanks.